Hi, this is Ms. Hadi from Olympian High School. I'm going to continue a lecture on the course of empires, chapter 2. So this is the political section in traditions and encounters, right around page 35. And we had just finished talking about the Sumerian city-states starting to fall to a conqueror named Sargon or Sargon of Akkad. And we talked about how he tried to maintain control by taking his armies personally all around. Of course, he's building an empire, which is he's got control of a territory larger than just a kingdom, so taking over other kingdoms. And I told you that after he died, successors tried to maintain control, but he had chronic rebellions, or they had chronic rebellions that continued to plague their empire. Okay, so then we got into the course of empire with the first Babylonian empire, Hammurabi. Okay, so let's get into that. And I will find it for you. All right, Hammurabi of Babylon. So again, this is Babel. This is where I'm from. I was just in this area this summer. And so he has this example, Hammurabi, of what an empire could look like. He has what's called a precedent, an example to copy. And notice that the word book uses the word prominent. Prominent usually means something that sticks out or something that's really important, really famous. So it says most prominent of the later conquerors to follow the precedent that Sargon of Akkad set was Hammurabi, who reigned or rules from 1792 to 1750 BCE, and he called himself the king of the four quarters of the world. Now, of course, it wasn't very big because at that time they had no idea how big the world was, but it was the biggest that they'd seen. Now, I want you to notice some changes in continuities. Notice that he continues to use some of Sargon's administrative techniques. So it says he takes them, he changes them a little, but it's still, in essence, continuing. So he improves on Sargon's administrative techniques by relying on centralized bureaucratic rule and regular taxation. So these are two things that continue: centralized bureaucratic rule and regular taxation. A change that he does is instead of taking his armies to wherever he's trying to subdue an area, is he maintains his army outside of modern-day Baghdad or Baghdad and near Babylon, and he regularly taxes people, and then he uses that money to care for his military rather than taking his military and having them be housed and fed by the random areas that they went. So that's a little bit better than his predecessors, and also spreads the cost out instead of, whoever happens to be, wherever the army happens to be, they're getting kind of unfairly taxed by having to take care of the army. So here's what this on the side on the PowerPoint tells you. They improve taxation and legislation. Legislation means laws, legal laws. We're about to get into Hammurabi's laws and his law code in a moment. I'll tell you more about it. And then I just know that they use local governors to maintain control of cities, and that's a little bit discussed in the book. Before I get into anything else, let's talk about Hammurabi's laws. Now you can go and see Hammurabi's law code. You can see this basalt steel is about my height. It's about 5'2", and I went to go see it at the Louvre, which is a famous museum in Paris. It's really, really big, and on it are inscribed over 200 law codes, and in it are very stern or strict punishments for many, many crimes. You steal something, you'll be killed. You commit adultery, you could be killed. So there are so many strict punishments. Now, this is important because this law code creates a sense of unity throughout his empire, because the same laws are supposed to apply to you no matter where you are. Now, the truth is that they weren't always meted out in the same way. Judges would use their judgment in order to decide how someone would be punished, but at least it provided, in a sense, a way of having uniform laws throughout the empire. The second really important thing about the law code, Hammurabi's law code, is it's where we get this idea of an eye for an eye. So your punishment fit the crime. If you poked somebody's eye out, your own eye would get poked out. If you broke somebody's leg, your leg would be broken. Unless, and this is a really important unless they were of higher or lower social status than you. So this tells us that there was a social stratification in the Babylonian Empire. And so, for example, if you broke the bone of somebody who was a lower class than you are, then you might have to pay a fine. Okay, so just know that this is called the principle of lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, where your punishment fits the crime but takes into account your social standing. So that's the exception. The Babylonian Empire would, a lot of its standards would continue, but it would eventually fall before the Hittites, which are an Indo-European group, make sure you write that down, who come down from Anatolia and attack it. And I hope you learned something about the Babylonian Empire.